The problem with $200,000 isn't the number, it's what the number does to your brain. There's a specific cognitive mechanism documented in behavioral economics research where achieving a significant financial milestone doesn't just reward you, it actively suppresses the behaviors that got you there. $200,000 in your 40s isn't just a balance in an account. It's a trap dressed as an achievement. And I'm going to show you exactly how the math, the tax structure, and your own neurology conspire to turn one of the best things you've ever done, saving aggressively for years, into the quiet mechanism that determines whether you retire with freedom or retire broke in slow motion, one comfortable year at a time. Most people who see the title of this video assume I'm going to tell them $200,000 is too small. I'm going to tell them something worse. I'm going to tell them $200,000 is exactly large enough to make you feel like you've solved a problem you haven't started yet. And the data on what happens to savings behavior after people cross major milestones suggests the ones who save nothing and stay urgent often end up with more at 65 than the ones who hit 200,000 and exhaled. That's the claim. Let me back it up. Here's the metaphor I keep returning to: the false summit. If you've ever hiked a serious mountain, you know what a false summit is. You've been climbing for hours, legs burning, water almost gone. You look up and see the peak above you. You push hard, crest the ridge, and then the actual summit materializes 2 miles further, hidden behind the one you just climbed. You already burned your reserves. You already celebrated. The real climb is still ahead. That's $200,000 in your 40s. Getting there took real sacrifice, real years of discipline. But the actual destination, a portfolio generating enough passive income to replace your paycheck without eating itself alive, is still a significant distance up the mountain. The problem isn't reaching the false summit. The problem is treating it like the real peak. I'll return to the false summit throughout this entire video, because every trap I'm about to describe follows the same structure. You stopped climbing because the view looked right. You're still at the false summit, and you don't know it. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you the behavioral economics data that reframes how you think about every financial milestone you've ever chased. But first, I need to show you something hiding inside your retirement account that most advisors either don't explain clearly or choose not to bring up at all. Because when you run the real numbers, $200,000 quietly shrinks. Most of that $200,000 isn't yours, not metaphorically. Literally. If the majority of your savings sits in a traditional 401k or a traditional IRA, which is true for most American savers, because those accounts come with an immediate tax deduction that feels exactly like free money, then the federal government holds a claim against every dollar in that account. Not today. Not yet. The invoice arrives at age 73 in the form of required minimum distributions. When the IRS mandates you begin withdrawing a specific percentage of your balance every year, whether you need the income or not. Here's what that looks like in practice. You're 42, $200,000 in a traditional 401k, contributing nothing more. At 7% real annual return, the approximate historical average for a diversified stock portfolio after inflation, that account grows to roughly $1,080,000 by age 67. Sounds like success. But then the required minimum distributions begin. In your first year, you're withdrawing approximately $40,000, which stacks directly on top of your Social Security income. If you're collecting $24,000 a year from Social Security, a reasonable estimate for a middle income earner, claiming at a normal age, you suddenly have $64,000 of taxable income. In 2026, that places a single filer firmly in the 22% federal bracket. Add state income taxes in most states, 3 to 8%, depending on where you live, and you're looking at an effective rate of 25 to 30% on money you already paid taxes to earn, money you already sacrificed to save. But it compounds further. Required minimum distributions don't stay flat. They grow as a percentage of your balance each year based on IRS life expectancy tables. If your portfolio grows well through your late 60s, your distributions in your early 70s can push you into the 24 or even 32% federal bracket. And at that point, you trigger IRMA, the income-related monthly adjustment amount, which is Medicare's premium surcharge for higher income retirees. In 2026, IRMA surcharges can add between $666 and $4,184 annually to your Medicare premiums, depending on your income tier. A financial penalty for having too much forced income. Levied at the exact moment you're most dependent on Medicare to function. You think the tax advantage of the traditional 401k is your friend. The tax advantage is a loan due in full at a time and tax rate not of your choosing. That's the reversal the retirement planning brochure doesn't include. The $1,080,000 you accumulated, the government has a standing claim on roughly $250,000 to $300,000 of it at current rates. Your $200,000 of seemingly clean savings is, more accurately, $150,000 to $160,000 of assets you fully control with a silent lien attached that compounds for 25 years before it arrives. Your financial advisor's response to this, by the way, was a quarterly newsletter with a stock photo of a lighthouse. The lighthouse is inspiring. It is not a tax mitigation strategy. And while we're running numbers, over 30 years, a 1% annual advisory fee on a $200,000 portfolio costs you approximately $374,000 in lost compounding. That's the math. $200,000 at 7% over 30 years becomes $1,522,000. The same portfolio at 6%, the effective return after a 1% annual fee grows to $1,149,000. The difference is $373,000. It never appears on a bill. It appears as the gap between the projection you were shown and the number you actually have 20 years later, when catching up is a mathematical fantasy. Stay with me, because this next part is where the trap becomes genuinely counterintuitive. And it's the argument that makes the entire thesis of this video stand up. In 2012, behavioral science researchers published findings on what happens to savings behavior immediately after individuals cross a major financial milestone. The data showed that people who hit a significant threshold, 100,000, 200,000, any round number that the brain registers as mission accomplished, were measurably more likely to increase discretionary spending, reduce contribution rates, and take on lifestyle debt in the 18 months following that milestone. The technical term is goal completion relaxation. The mechanism is neurological, not moral. The mild financial stress that was driving your aggressive saving behavior was functioning as a productivity signal. It was your brain allocating attention and resources toward an unsolved problem. The moment you cross $200,000, that signal weakens. The urgency that woke you up at 3 a.m. thinking about compounding gets reassigned. You feel you've earned a rest. Your nervous system agrees. Your portfolio starts drifting. This is where I want to introduce someone. I'll call her Sandra. We'll come back to her in detail later. Sandra hit $200,000 last year at 44 and read an article that said she was on track. The article didn't mention goal completion relaxation. It showed her a projection chart with a smooth curve reaching $1,200,000 at 65. She bookmarked it. Then she went on with her life, which is exactly what the research says people do after seeing a projection chart that makes them feel fine. We'll come back to what happens to Sandra. But first, David. David ran a commercial cleaning business for most of his 30s. Not glamorous, not a dinner party story, but the kind of business that prints quiet, consistent cash. He worked 60-hour weeks, kept his lifestyle deliberately modest, maxed his 401k, put extra into a brokerage account. By 42, he'd hit $200,000. He hired a financial advisor. The advisor produced projections, comfortable retirement at 68. David and his wife celebrated, exhaled, and then the way these things always go, nothing much changed for 7 years. He didn't make reckless decisions. He bought a nicer car, took a couple of vacations, stopped managing money with the attention he used to, let the advisor run things. By 49, David had $230,000. 7 years of market gains, 7 years of modest contributions, $30,000 added to his net worth. Here's what those 7 quiet years actually cost him. If David had maintained his previous savings rate, let's estimate $15,000 annually, which is conservative for a profitable small business owner, his portfolio should have grown to approximately $580,000 by age 49 at 7% real returns. He had $230,000. The gap is $350,000. That gap, compounding at 7% from age 49 to age 65, becomes approximately $1,040,000 in foregone wealth. David didn't coast for 7 years and miss out on $30,000 in contributions. He coasted for 7 years and lost $1 million in final compounding. The false summit didn't cost him effort. It cost him $1 million. And there is no version of the next 16 years that closes that gap at his income level. People who build real wealth don't have a better investment strategy. They have a better tolerance for permanent, mild urgency. They can hold the simultaneous belief that they're doing well and that it isn't enough yet. Not anxiety, not paranoia, a quiet refusal to let the false summit feel like the actual peak. $200,000 makes that harder because it's precisely engineered by evolution to feel like an arrival. The people who saved nothing and stayed hungry, their urgency was preserved by necessity. They kept the side income running. They kept their eyes moving for the next opportunity. They never got to exhale. And the data suggests that over 20-year windows, a lot of them ended up ahead of the people who relaxed at 200,000. That's uncomfortable. It should be. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content. Otherwise, YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. Now, here's what knowing this data and actually having a system built around it look like, and they're not the same thing. I had the numbers on sequence of returns, risk, tax, drag, and behavioral coasting for years before I did anything coherent with it. Understanding the problem and having a framework that turns I should probably do more into a specific mathematically defensible date. Those are two separate things. That's what I built when I wrote the exit code. 8 chapters of analysis built on 50 years of actual retirement data. Not opinions, not anecdotes that felt like data. 50 years of documented retirement outcomes, what made people financially durable, what destroyed people who looked fine on paper. The part most directly relevant to this video is what I call the 4% trap. The 4% rule shows up in basically every retirement calculator you've ever touched, but the original research by William Bengen in 1994 was designed around a specific 30-year retirement window and a specific portfolio allocation. It doesn't account for sequence of returns volatility in the early withdrawal years, which I'm about to walk you through in detail. And it doesn't account for the healthcare cost reality for anyone retiring before 65. The exit code replaces it with a dynamic withdrawal method built on the actual spending patterns of retirees who didn't run out of money, and it operates on substantially different mechanics than the standard 4% model. There's also a chapter on what I call the $14,000 invisible bill, the average annual out-of-pocket healthcare cost for someone bridging from early retirement to Medicare eligibility. If you retire at 62, you're paying for your own health coverage for 3 years minimum. Marketplace premiums for a single person in their early 60s currently average between $800 and $1,000 a month, depending on state and plan tier. Over 3 years, that's between $28,000 and $36,000 in premiums alone, before deductibles, prescriptions, and any coverage gaps. That number never appears in the projection charts you've been shown. It's wiped out plans that look solid in every calculator available. If you're in your 40s with $200,000 and a vague concept of retiring before 65, that invisible bill deserves its own line in your model before anything else. The exit code gives you the model built on 50 years of real data, not on optimistic assumptions, and a lighthouse photograph. You can find it through the link in the description for less than a dinner out. Given that the decisions it addresses have 6-figure consequences, that seems like an acceptable cost-benefit ratio. Back to the mountain. Because the next part is where $200,000 stops being merely insufficient and starts being specifically dangerous. And it connects directly to why Sandra's story doesn't end the way the projection chart told her it would. A brief thing I want to tease before I get there. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you the number that $200,000 actually generates in annual retirement income, not what the compound interest calculators show, but what 4% of the accumulated amount actually buys you per year. It's a number that recontextualizes everything. But first, sequence of returns risk. because this is the mechanism that makes a small portfolio uniquely fragile in a way that no amount of good average returns can fix. Sequence of returns risk is the concept that the order in which you experience investment returns matters enormously once you're withdrawing money, and matters almost not at all when you're still accumulating. Two investors can earn the same average annual return over 30 years and end up in completely different financial positions in retirement, depending solely on whether the bad years hit early or late in the withdrawal phase. The mechanics are straightforward, but the consequences are brutal. When markets fall and you're withdrawing cash to cover your expenses, you're forced to sell more shares per dollar of income than you would in a flat or rising market. Those shares are gone permanently. They don't participate in the eventual recovery. When the market bounces back, your base is smaller, and the compounding on a smaller base means you never fully recover the ground you lost. The mathematical asymmetry makes this vicious. A 30% loss requires a 43% gain to break even. A 50% loss requires a full 100% gain just to return to where you started. The math doesn't care about your average return. It cares about the sequence. And this asymmetry becomes more destructive as portfolio size shrinks, because the withdrawal as a percentage of your remaining assets accelerates with each down year. Let's run Sandra's specific numbers. Sandra hits $260,000 saved by age 53. She exits her job involuntarily. The Employee Benefit Research Institute's 2023 survey found that 46% of American workers retire earlier than planned, the majority due to job loss, health issues, or caregiving demands. Healthcare administration is consolidating fast. She doesn't choose this. The market drops 30% in her first year of retirement, which has happened in 2002, 2008, and 2023 times in 20 years. Her portfolio falls from $260,000 to $182,000. She needs $40,000 to cover the year's expenses. She withdraws it. She has $142,000 left. The market recovers 25% the following year. Her portfolio rises to $177,500. She withdraws another $40,000 for living expenses. She has $137,500 remaining. After just 2 years, one bad year and one recovery year, she's withdrawn $80,000 and her portfolio is worth 47% less than when she started. In year 3, her withdrawal of $40,000 represents 29% of her remaining portfolio. At that rate, no market performance can save the math. The sequence of returns problem at $260,000 isn't statistical bad luck, it's structural. Now run the same numbers on a $1.5 million portfolio hit by the same 30% crash. It falls to $1,050,000. After a $40,000 withdrawal, $1,010,000 remains. The 25% recovery brings it to $1,262,500. After another $40,000 withdrawal, $1,222,500, the portfolio is substantially intact and healing. Sequence of returns risk is real at any portfolio size, but at $1.5 million, it's a difficult year. At $260,000, it's the end of the plan. Sandra's projection chart never modeled a 30% drop in year 1. Projection charts assume smooth, sequential, average returns because that's how compound interest calculators work. Real markets don't produce smooth, sequential returns. They produce volatile, lumpy, occasionally catastrophic returns in clusters. And the clustering is most dangerous at small portfolio sizes, precisely because the withdrawal demand relative to the remaining balance becomes insurmountable. That's the kicker nobody says out loud. $200,000 is exactly the amount that's large enough to be the entire foundation of your retirement plan and small enough to be structurally destroyed by the same market behavior that a $1.5 million portfolio absorbs as a forgettable quarter. This is the false summit in its most unforgiving form. You're not just at the wrong peak. You're at a peak where the weather can end the climb entirely, while the climbers further up the mountain barely notice the wind. Now, I want to show you the number that lands differently every single time I put it in front of someone, because it makes the abstract math concrete in a way that nothing else does. Here's what $200,000 in accumulated savings actually generates. At the 4% withdrawal rate, the standard figure embedded in essentially every retirement resource you've ever read, $200,000 produces $8,000 per year. That is $667 per month. The Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey for 2022 puts average annual spending for Americans over 65 at approximately $57,800. $667 a month covers 11 days of that, 11 days per year. That's what $200,000 buys you in retirement income. The other 354 days are funded by Social Security, by part-time work, by whatever you manage to piece together from outside the savings you spent decades building. Every compounding conversation, every sacrifice, every skipped vacation, it produced 11 days of annual coverage. That's the false summit without the mountain metaphor. That's the raw arithmetic. Now, look at where you actually stand in the savings cohort. Vanguard's How America Saves report from 2024 shows the median 401k balance for Americans aged 45 to 54 is approximately $142,000. The median, half of your entire age cohort, has less than $142,000 saved. If you have $200,000, you're in the top third of savers in your peak earning decade. You're measurably ahead of your peers, and your savings generates $667 a month. Being ahead of the average matters when the average is adequate. When the average is catastrophically underprepared, being above average and being financially prepared are completely different things. You're winning a competition that leads to the same cliff. Being the tallest person in a flooding basement is still being in a flooding basement. The financial planning industry's response to this, offered here as a public service, is a brochure with a rented couple on a rented sailboat, captioned, "Live the retirement you deserve." The implication is that you've arrived. The sailboat cannot cover 11 days of your annual expenses. You're still at the false summit, and they're selling you a photo of the peak. Here's what actually moves the needle. 3 specific mechanics, not motivational observations. The first is a tax location audit on what you currently hold. If more than 60% of your portfolio sits in traditional tax-deferred accounts, you have a future tax liability dressed up as a balance. The solution isn't to abandon the 401k. The employer match on most plans is a guaranteed return you cannot replicate anywhere in the market, and passing it up is genuinely irrational. The solution is to fund a Roth IRA, and if your employer offers it, a Roth 401k option in parallel. Every dollar that converts from pre-tax to post-tax today arrives at retirement with no IRS lien attached, no required minimum distribution schedule, no IRMA trigger. The optimal windows for Roth conversions are lower income years, career transitions, sabbaticals, business loss years. When you're in a lower bracket, then you'll be at peak earnings or in forced distribution territory. Most people think about Roth conversions after they retire. By then, you're converting pre-tax dollars at your highest ever effective rate. The time to do it is when the conversion tax is cheap, not when the alternative is worse. The second is what I think of as a return sequence buffer. This is a cash or short-term bond reserve held completely outside your investment portfolio, not as a sleeve inside it equal to approximately 2 years of your projected annual retirement expenses. When the market drops in your early retirement years, you draw from the buffer and leave the equities alone. You let the portfolio recover before you touch it. This one mechanism eliminates the specific sequence of returns catastrophe I described with Sandra's numbers. But here's the critical detail that changes how you think about $200,000. For a $200,000 portfolio, this buffer needs to be somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000. That's roughly half your total savings parked outside of growth assets. Your effective invested capital is $100,000 to $120,000, not $200,000. Every projection you've ever run that used $200,000 as the starting number was overstating your compounding base by approximately a factor of 2. The buffer is necessary. The buffer also demonstrates precisely how inadequate $200,000 is as a retirement foundation. The third is a secondary income source that actually exists rather than one you're planning to build someday. Not passive income as an aspiration, a real cash-producing activity running in parallel to your primary employment. Freelance work in your professional field. a rental unit, a consulting retainer, a small content operation, anything that generates independent cash flow. The Employee Benefit Research Institute data says nearly half of workers exit their primary career earlier than planned. If your income model has exactly one input your employer, you're one restructuring, one health event, one organizational change away from Sandra's situation. A secondary income stream does two things simultaneously. It generates additional investable capital every month, and it maintains your financial survival instincts, which $200,000 is quietly engineered to deactivate. The urgency that secondary income preserves is worth more than most people's investment alpha. Sandra, by the way, is still working. She didn't lose her position at 53, but she started doing things differently. She opened a Roth IRA last year and began the slow process of shifting her tax exposure. She started a weekend consulting practice in her specialty, modest income, but it runs independently of whether her employer keeps her job. She asked her financial advisor about sequence of returns risk at their last quarterly meeting and received a response that was technically accurate, vaguely reassuring, and completely insufficient. She recognized the insufficiency, which told her something important about where the useful information actually lived. She's still at the fall summit, but she knows it's a fall summit now. She's not stopping, she's still climbing. And knowing the ridge isn't the peak changes how you manage your water, your energy, and your time between here and the actual top. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. Not the exciting rotations, not the asymmetric bets your brother-in-law explained at Thanksgiving, not the thing that's going to be different this time. The boring, consistent, psychologically disciplined accumulation with secondary income running, Roth conversions happening in the low bracket years, a buffer positioned against sequence of returns, volatility, and urgency kept alive, despite a balance that keeps telling you to relax. That's what works across 30-year windows. The people who got this right were remarkably boring about it. They were consistent. They kept their urgency intact even when the fall summit was telling them to sit down and enjoy the view. The view is good. The view is real. You earned it. But the actual summit is still up there. And the math only cares about what you did after the ridge.